I was one of the war children conceived by my parents during a vacation my father took after fighting on the European front. He was a flight engineer on a B-17. He was demobilized after being almost transferred to the Pacific Front. We returned to my mother's home in Florida and began to live the dream of civilian life. My father became a mechanic and earned a decent living. Everything was fine. But then North Korea decided to annex the southern part of the peninsula, and our country did not stand idly by, entering into a new conflict. My father felt it was his duty and re-enlisted in the Air Force, this time as a flight engineer on a B-29. After the conflict, my father decided he had devoted enough time to military service and would serve until retirement, which he did, reaching the highest rank E9. I hope this history lesson hasn't bored you, but I felt it was important to tell you about my childhood. We settled in the sleepy town of Orlando, Florida. Yes, it was a sleepy town back then. We locals refer to that period as BD, before Disney. I graduated from high school and was fortunate enough to get a football scholarship to a small southern college. During my senior year, I met my future wife, Kathy Sweeney, and it felt like we were meant to be together. We fell truly in love. She seemed like everything I ever wanted in life. When I left for college, it meant we would be apart for a long time, but we felt we could make it work, and we did. I came home on the bus as often as my wallet, class schedule, and practice schedule allowed. Oh, those were the homecomings! One practice ended with our middle linebacker tackling me and breaking my knee. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just the way the game plays out. When I couldn't play anymore, my scholarship was revoked. I was allowed to finish the year, but I couldn't afford to continue my education, and that was the end of my college career. I was studying to be a marine biologist and conducting extensive research on low-frequency whale communication and how it travels long distances in water to attract mates. It seems that the U.S. Navy became very interested in some of my theories, and I wrote several articles about this phenomenon. I was asked to enlist in the military. The other option was the draft, which meant a direct route to Vietnam with no right to return and no $200. On August 6, 1963, I took the oath of office, and 6 weeks later, I was commissioned as an ensign, 01, and began my career in the Navy. I was given the opportunity to continue studying the aforementioned theories, and with Uncle Sam's money, I was able to develop a passive hydrophone capable of picking up these signals, and if the phones were placed in the right order, it was possible to determine their source. I was ordered, to put these theories into practice, as you might have guessed, on the rivers, harbors, and deltas of Vietnam to track enemy movements. Before leaving, I was given 2 weeks' leave, went home, and married Kathy, my high school sweetheart. Kathy Sweeney became Mrs. Kenneth Mapstead. We enjoyed each other as much as 2 weeks would allow, and then I left. It seems that was enough time for us to conceive our first child. Yes, she was pregnant. When Evan was born, I was deep in the country and didn't find out until 3 weeks later. The Red Cross helped me call home, and I was able to talk to my wife and try to comfort her, telling her that I couldn't be there at such an important moment in our lives. My first tour was coming to an end, and we both knew that I would be home soon, which helped us both calm down. My business trip ended. I boarded a C-124 plane and flew to California, and then a couple more times to get home. I was home for 60 days, and we planned to spend that time together as best we could. I tried to bond with my son, but it seems that 1-year-olds are very attached to their mothers. He's a wonderful child. Wow. Where did 60 days go? It seems like I just got off the plane, and now it's time to board another one to get to my next duty station. You guessed it, the next stop was Saigon. I've already bored you enough with all this backstory, but suffice it to say that while I was away, my wife had another son, and I experienced tremendous grief again during a phone call from the Red Cross. At least this time I wasn't 3 weeks late. After 2 tours, I was exhausted, so I submitted my resignation and left the service on August 14th, 1967. I was a Navy lieutenant, '03, and Uncle Sam didn't want to let me go, but I was determined to leave. This time, I boarded a C-141 and flew via Hawaii to San Francisco. What a reception awaited us. What the hell had happened to our country if our soldiers returning from the war were being cursed and spat on? I returned home, and even here I was greeted rather coldly. Of course, my parents were overjoyed that I had returned home safe and sound, unlike many of my comrades who returned home without limbs, or worse, in coffins. My wife, although she tried to act normal, seemed a little distracted, and of course my 2 sons, Evan and Darren, were very cold, but that was to be expected. As I began to adjust to civilian life, I noticed little things around the house that seemed out of place, but what could I do? I had been away for 3 years. How could I know what was normal and what wasn't? Our sex life was far from what it used to be, and I began to wonder what had happened to the intimacy we had always felt for each other. I vowed to bring back that intimacy and love, and to start bonding with my 2 sons. I was home now, and my deepest desire was to make it a home for all of us. Unemployment benefits couldn't last forever, so I started looking for work. I began sending out resumes to every company I could find, but it seemed that veterans weren't a priority and weren't in high demand in any job market. I got a call from a company offering me an interview in Langley, Virginia in a week. It seemed they needed someone with my skills for certain operations. I told Katie about the interview invitation, and she didn't seem upset by the possibility of me working for the company. I explained that it would require frequent travel and that I would be away a lot. She replied that she was used to being a single mother and living alone. I thought about it and decided to put the idea on hold. I went to the interview and was hired with the understanding that I would be deploying underwater surveillance systems in oceans and seas around the world. When Katie found out about my new assignment, she wasn't upset about the travel at all and decided it was time to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk. Okay, what do you want to talk about? You've been on the road almost the entire time we've been together, from high school through college and 4 years in the military. We've spent very little time together, and I've learned to adapt to a certain lifestyle to maintain my emotional balance and sense of self-worth as a woman. I can't disagree that I've been absent for most of our life together, but I had no choice. College was necessary to improve our chances of a successful life, and I had no connection to the Army. Can I ask what changes you made in your life to achieve that lifestyle? Well, when I find a babysitter, I go out with my friends to a bar and a disco, and when I can't find a babysitter, I usually invite them over for dinner and drinks. I see. I'm going to venture a guess that these friends have an attribute between their legs, and you enjoy helping them use that attribute in the evenings. Am I understanding you correctly? You make it sound like I'm promiscuous and selfish, only thinking about myself. That's not true at all. I want you to have the same opportunities and be able to enjoy the company of other people. Isn't that fair? Let's be clear. You want to continue entertaining your friends and allow me to find and entertain mine. Is that the essence of your proposal? Yes, I think that's the best way to put it. We'll have what people call an open marriage. I didn't agree to an open marriage and never thought about cheating, even when all the whores in Saigon were climbing into my lap. I don't understand how you can spread your legs for your friends' entertainment and think I'd agree or even consider such a proposal. As long as I'm here, that's not going to happen. If you want an open marriage, file for divorce. I'm not going to play your stupid games. What's more, I don't want to touch you anymore, so you better take care of your friends. Speaking of your fidelity, are these boys mine? Or have you been entertaining your friends throughout our relationship? No wonder the boys are so wary of me. They've seen so many men come and go that they have no idea who I am or if I'm even in their lives. Believe me, before I start paying child support by court order, I want to do a DNA test to make sure they're my children. How can you say that? Of course they're your children, and I don't want a divorce. What's the point? You'll be able to travel again, and I'll be able to sleep with whoever I want, and you'll be free to sleep with any girl you like. It's a win-win for everyone. Listen to me. This is not happening. First thing in the morning, I'm filing for divorce, and tonight I'm getting DNA samples from the boys and taking them to the lab right after I file. Good luck with child support. I've already been told that Kenny Mapstead no longer exists. As soon as I find a job, I'll get a new identity with a new social security number and all the accompanying documents. Then I'll leave for parts unknown. One thing is certain. You won't know where I'm going. If by some miracle the boys turn out to be mine, I will ensure they receive a proper upbringing through the courts, with your help or with the help of a court-appointed guardian. I'm packing my things and leaving. I don't want to stay in this brothel a minute longer than I have to. That evening, I left and booked a hotel room for 2 weeks. As promised, I filed the paperwork with a family lawyer, went to a local lab, and submitted DNA samples. I paid $200 for expedited processing. As a recent military veteran, I had no real property or large sums of cash to hide or move, only my car, which I planned to sell before reporting to Langley. My phone was flooded with messages. "We can work this out. It was just sex. Don't ruin a good thing." The endless vocabulary of a deceiver. I deleted all the messages and then called my parents, which I was very afraid to do. To say they were stunned is an understatement, especially when I mentioned the boys' origins. 3 days later, the lab confirmed our fears. The boys were not mine and did not have the same father. This confirmed all my suspicions. My parents were stunned by the news. That same day, I was handed my papers and began preparing to leave for Langley. Before leaving, I had to make one last phone call, which went something like this. "Hello, this is Kathy Mapstead. How can I help you?" "Kenny Mapstead, you can help yourself by finding out who the fathers of your children are so you can get child support. Goodbye, live in shit, you deserve it." My name is Tom, and I am currently 65. I'm a supervisor at a lumber yard just outside of Nashville, and I live a simple, low-key life. I have a faithful dog named Duke that I love, and I live in a nice little house with a porch swing I built. I sit on that swing most nights, a cold drink in hand, contemplating how life has shaped up for me. But I find my mind returning frequently to 1985, when I was a 25-year-old kid. I was living on my parents' farm in a small Kansas town where everybody knew everybody. It was that kind of a place where the cashier at the grocery store was also the Little League coach, and Friday night entertainment revolved around either the local football game or kicking back on the tailgate of a truck and staring up at the stars. Our land was small, though it served our purposes. We had mainly dairy cows, and those were my father's pride and joy. He devoted himself to building it up, one fence post at a time, always with the hope that I would one day take over. I toyed with the notion for a bit. I liked the work, and I liked the order of farm life. The early wake-ups, the smell of hay and fresh milk, the silence that settled over the landscape once the cows had been put to bed for the night. We weren't rich, but we were secure, selling our milk to the same reliable customers for year after year. One of those customers was Susan, who lived about 5 miles away from us, over the old bridge on Deer Creek. She was 38 years old, unmarried and childless, and lived alone in an attractive white house with green shutters and a wraparound porch. Susan was the woman around town, remembered not for any scandal, but for her uniqueness, intelligence, grace, kindness, and quiet beauty. She would stop by our farm to buy milk and cheese, never paying late and later standing and chatting with my mother or passing my father by his work. She never stayed too long, just long enough to make a warm impact. One afternoon, as I was taking the hay bales and throwing them into the back of the barn from a wagon, Dad came over to me and stood with his hands on his hips and said, "Tom, you're going over to Susan's tomorrow." I wiped my brow, asking, "What for?" "She needs somebody to fix her fence because it is a mess, and she asked me if I had a man." I raised an eyebrow, amused. "Are you volunteering me? You know I can't say no to good money." "Are you?" he replied with a smirk. "Plus, you like trying something different once in a while." He was correct. The farm life was plodding, but some days blurred together. Repairing a fence at a tranquil home down the road seemed like the perfect kind of change I never knew I wanted. The next morning, I loaded my truck with tools, hammer, nails, level, gloves, and drove to Susan's house. It was deep in the summer, and the sun was already beaming high up in the sky by the time I reached. Her house could easily have been a postcard, flowers on the porch and wind chime that gently clinked with the breeze. She opened the door wearing a sundress, hair sleekly tied back and a smile lighting up her face. "Good morning, Tom," she said, as though we were old friends. "Morning, ma'am," I said, doffing my cap. "Oh, don't call me ma'am," she laughed. "It makes me feel ancient." I chuckled in return. "All right, Susan." She led me back around to the fence, which was indeed in need of repair, some boards rotted, a few posts leaning at odd angles. "I'll fix it," I promised, dropping to my knees to examine the bottom. "I trust you," she said. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said. And with that, she left me to my job and I went about taking measurements, prying off old boards and knocking in new ones. Dirt coated my arms and sweat dripped down my back, and the sun beat mercilessly. But I also found a little peace in the solitude. Just me and the wood, fixing what had been broken. About an hour into my labor, Susan brought me a tall glass of cold lemonade, ice rattling. "I thought you may want this," she said, setting it up on a small table she had outside. I nodded appreciatingly. "Thanks, it's sweltering here." She sat on the porch for a while, drinking her own serving as she watched me do stuff. "You're good with your hands," she said. I laughed. "You should see me trying to make biscuits. That's another story." Her smile was one of those that stayed on. After a minute, she rose, smoothed down her dress, and returned to the house. The rest of the day was spent in a peaceful rhythm of cutting, banging, and checking my angles. Toward the end of the afternoon, I was half done. The sun started sinking, drenching the backyard gold, and cicadas droned in the trees. That was when I heard the screen door creak again. The next time, she was barefoot, clutching a plate of cookies. "You've been doing a bit of work today. You've deserved these," she said. I thanked her, then wiped my hands and leaned against a post. She gave me some TK cookies and sat down on the step with me, and we talked more and longer about her house and my family. I told her about my father and how he hoped that I'd take over the farm, and about how I wasn't sure at all. Susan whispered to me that she wanted to move to a big city and lead a different life, but she never did. She felt anchored by the town, she said, but also a bit stuck. She hesitated and stared at me, and then asked in a low voice, "Do you have a girlfriend, Tom?" I blinked, caught off guard. "No," I replied honestly. "Honestly, not really looking. I've been so consumed managing the farm, there just isn't enough time." She nodded in understanding. "I understand," she said, looking out at the horizon. "Out here it gets pretty lonely at times, too." I had to pause before answering because, well, the answer was yes. No one to talk to, no one to have dinner with, not even anyone to sit on the porch with and just to be. I studied her face, gazing into it, really looking at the woman before me. She was not only beautiful, she was also alone, as I was, but strong and warm. Then she smiled sweetly and inquired, "Would you like to come to dinner tonight?" Suddenly, there was a change. I stopped for a heartbeat, just that, and no more. "Yeah," I said. I'd like that. The rest of the afternoon I tried to focus on the fence, but my mind kept wandering back to Susan's offer. It wasn't flirtatious or dramatic, soft and simple, a neighbor asking for company. But there was a lonely look in her eyes, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. I drove home around 6, still covered in dust and sweat. My mother looked at me and said, "You don't sit on the couch that way." I chuckled, promised her I wouldn't, and went directly to the shower. The water was cool and revitalizing, grounding me, and as I scrubbed the grime off my arms, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Susan had looked at me. Once I was done with one thing and the next, I put on blue jeans and a new button-down shirt. Nothing too fancy because I didn't want to look like I was going out on a date, even though I didn't know what this dinner was. I also didn't want to arrive to the party looking as if I'd just grappled a cow. The sky was beginning to turn orange as I pulled into her driveway. Her house shimmered in the warm, late summer light. The front porch light was on, and wind chimes seemed to ring the same gentle rhythm from earlier that morning. Before I could even knock, she opened the door. "You're just in time," she grinned. "Come in." Roasted chicken and herbs filled the house with a delicious scent, a warm, welcoming scent. She ushered me into the kitchen, where the table was festive with 2 place settings, cloth napkins, a bottle of wine, and a small vase of wildflowers. "I wasn't expecting a feast," I said, surveying what I saw. "Well, I don't cook like this for just anybody," she said, and for a second I couldn't tell whether she was joking. We took out seats, and conversation came quickly and naturally. She inquired about the farm and how it was growing up with animals and chores on a daily basis. I said I loved it most days, but on some it seemed that the world was passing me by and leaving me there. She agreed. She had felt that way for the last 10 years. After eating, she asked that we retire to the living room. We both poured glasses of wine, and she put in a movie called Somewhere in Time, a slow-moving romantic movie from the late 70s. But I don't remember the plot too well. We were talking more than watching the screen. She told us of her childhood there, how she grew up in that very place and inherited it after they all died. Once she even applied to a design school in Chicago, but never went because of fear. "I felt bad about it at times," she said, "but I never wanted to say anything until now. I talked about my own unrealized dream to become a pilot. Life takes you down a path you never really questioned, and then 30 years later you wonder what life would have been like if things were different." I realized that Susan had folded her legs under her while on the couch, her body turned sideways to look at me. Her hair looked slightly mussed, as though she had been playing with it absent-mindedly. Her eyes were not only kind, they were inquiring. "Tom, let me ask you something," she said softly. "Sure? Do you ever feel like you were maybe supposed to end up somewhere else, but you haven't, so you missed your chance?" I breathed out and answered, "Every single day." She smiled at this, not a happy smile, no, but resigned. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. I didn't want to eat by myself once more. I wanted to say something meaningful in response, but the truth was, I didn't have anything wise to say. So I just nodded and answered, "Thanks for having me. It's getting late." I got up to leave, and she followed me to the door, thrusting into my hands a Tupperware container full of leftovers. "You've got a big day tomorrow. Take some with you." I clutched the Tupperware with one hand, made eye contact with her, and said, "You didn't have to make this much food for me." She cocked her head. "Here you are. I know. I wanted to." When I paused, it was a heavy pause, overbearing, heavier than silence should be. Then she went for it and gently touched my arm. Not romantically or flirtatiously, just human to human. "Good night, Tom." "Good night, Susan." The rocks on the ground crunched beneath my boots, the soft material soaking me to my skin. I sat in front of the wheel for a minute, watching the streak of the porch light behind me. I wasn't exactly sure what was happening between us. I did not even have an idea that some big thing was happening, but something in me had changed. It wasn't love, at least not yet, and perhaps never. It was not about that. It was simpler than that. Connection. After all the months of drudgery, silence, and being invisible, that in itself was more than I had bargained for. I drove home with the windows down, the cool night air on my face. I didn't feel tired when I got back to the farm. Instead, I went outside a while and just looked at the stars and thought. And the days went by as they always do. The day's first light came with cows that needed milking and stalls that needed cleaning and all that. Tools needed sharpening. No, a shift had taken place inside of me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was almost imperceptible. I was looking forward to the evenings more than ever. Susan never called, and I never expected her to. But it was on the day but one following our dinner, when I happened to be driving past her house on my way to town for a few goods of which I stood in need. I tried to convince myself I was just taking the scenic route, but I had a feeling I wasn't. Its porch was deserted, and the wind chime kept lazily chiming. But I didn't stop. I drove by, and thoughts of her would stick around in my head all the way to the hardware store. The telephone rang that night sometime after 7, as I was about to tuck into my mother's roast. "It's Susan," she said, her voice holding a trace of hesitation. "I just hope I'm not interrupting dinner." I assured her she wasn't. "I just wanted to say thank you again. The other night was more than I pretended." I responded, "It was important to me, too." Then she said, "Would it be weird to invite you back over just to talk?" So I did. We didn't have dinner that evening, choosing instead to sit on her porch with 2 bottles of beer and a bowl of salted peanuts between us. The sun dipped behind the hills while we talked about the town, the people, and the long, slow reach of time that closed so completely on a place like ours. That evening, she opened up a little more and told me that in her late 20s, she had been proposed to once, not by me, but by Mark. She was about to say yes, but something deep inside of her told her to say no. "I think I was terrified to lose myself," she said, "but I wasn't exactly sure about who I was yet either." I didn't know what else to say, so I spoke the truth. "I get it." Our quiet nights were our joint sanctuary, some of them full of food and others not. We would sometimes watch movies and sometimes just sit. The more I found out about Susan, the more I understood how deeply she'd buried that part of herself over the years, dreams of starting her own design studio, of living in the kind of place where the noise is endless and anonymous. She professed her love of the quiet here, though sometimes she said she hated it. "I get it," I said, not in the sense that I had ever lived in the thick of a city, but rather because I knew what it was like to carry with you a weight that was perhaps too heavy for one's own skin. One Friday night, home late, she made a fresh, from-scratch lasagna, and the whole house was perfumed by the smells of basil, garlic, and cheese. We laughed over burned garlic bread and drank too much wine. Amid laughter and tales about my father's obsession to get perfectly aligned fence posts, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. It wasn't a momentous occasion, no explosions, no music, just a warm hand on mine and a knowing glance. The next night I kissed her. I was a wreck, but not because I wasn't ready to kiss her. It was that I didn't actually know the rules. I didn't want to ruin what we had. Yet that night, as we sat in her dorm room and watched Tootsie a second time, she's probably not a film person, when she'd turned to speaking, I turned and leaned in and kissed her. She answered slowly, leisurely, as if time were no object. That's when my relationship with her went from just talking to something more. We didn't talk about what it was or what it meant. We just enjoyed each other's company. I worked on the farm in the morning, did chores in the afternoon, then went to Susan's in the evening. Sometimes we cooked together, sometimes we danced in her living room to tap her old records, and sometimes we just sat there and said nothing. My parents began to notice. One Sunday morning, as I sat with my dad and gave him a hand changing the oil in his truck, he said offhandedly, "You're at Susan's a lot." I stopped, taking the truth in. He did not say much after that. He just nodded and passed me a rag. Later, my mother pounced on me in the kitchen. "She is a good woman," she said. "I've always liked her." I stared at her with no idea what to say. "Do you think it's strange?" I asked. "No," she replied. "I think it's real." Hearing that was the most grounded I'd felt in months, maybe even years. Over time, Susan also let me assist her on small projects around her house, updating old light fixtures, repairing a leaky faucet, repainting a back room she wanted to be a small design studio. She opened up a folder she kept in her nightstand with sketches and ideas for interiors, layouts, color palettes, even furniture arrangements. "Did you ever think about doing this for real?" I asked. "All the time," she said, "but not here, not in this town." And then she looked at me, and I knew. "Do you want to leave?" I inquired. She paused. "I believe I do." It was a realization I should have seen coming, but that one struck me harder than I anticipated. I had gotten used to having her around, to having something finally bloom. "Don't you ever think about leaving too?" she asked. I looked out the window and saw the fence I fixed weeks ago still looming in the dusk. "Perhaps," I said, "if there were anything to chase." A long pause followed. "Would you come with me?" she asked softly. I didn't reply right away, but I had already accepted in my heart. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I would." And that's how it all started. The next chapter we never saw coming. We didn't pick up and leave right away. In fact, it was months before we began to talk seriously about the possibility. But the seed was sown. In the days following the dinner, Susan started bringing the idea up more often, not as a nudge, but there was a certain gentle determination to her voice, a type of quietness I'd come to know as a way of expressing something that mattered deeply to her. I think of one night in late October, standing in her kitchen as we cleaned up after dinner. Soft jazz was on the radio, and outside the wind had begun to hint at that dry chill that announces winter. She held her hands in the air to dry them off on a towel draped over the counter, adding, "I found a little listing in Kansas City. It's not huge, but it's on a corner lot, and there are great sites there. I just think it'd be really great for a design shop." I rested my back on the counter across from her and listened, fascinated. Her eyes danced and sparkled as if she was already picturing herself there, working with goods, painting walls, serving customers. "You don't think it would work?" she asked. "We?" I smiled, catching her drift. She shot me a wry look, and I knew exactly what she meant. We had a plan by the time Christmas came around. I'd stick around the admirable plains for an extra month or so to assist my parents wrapping up the season, selling off some cattle, winterizing the gear. Meanwhile, she would head to the city early to scout out locations, rent space, and start working. Telling my parents was hard, not because I was worried they would be angry, but because I could see the disappointment in my dad's eyes, even though he tried to hide it. He'd always imagined that I would take over the farm, but he didn't try to talk me out of it. "You've got to live your own life, son," he added, standing near the barn with his hands thrust into his coat pockets. "You'll always be welcome back." His comments carried more weight than he likely knew. By mid-January, I packed up my truck and moved to Kansas City. It was my first time to ever live anywhere beyond that small town. The city was initially overwhelming. Too many cars, too much noise, and a sea of people who didn't look you in the eye. But Susan made the adjustment easier. She found us a tiny apartment above a bakery in an old part of the city. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, the water pressure inconsistent. But it was ours. Somehow it felt exciting, new, alive. Susan embraced her dream like she'd been waiting her whole life to do so. She spent hours late into the night sketching ideas, shopping for furniture on the cheap and breaking bread with local businesses. I pitched in where I could, lifting, hauling, painting, fixing. We opened our shop in early March, called Hearth and Home, a concept that was all Susan's. She focused on creating cozy, affordable interior makeovers for small apartments and homes. Word of mouth spread quickly, and within a few months, she was fully booked. People loved her meticulous eye for detail, her warmth, and her canny knack for turning any space into the equivalent of a home. It was one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, watching this woman succeed. I was never envious, but felt proud that I was her support staff. I ran packages, handled the accounts, and did odds and ends for cash in the neighborhood to cover costs. We weren't rich, but we were creating something of value. At least, that was my belief. But, at the 1-year mark, I started to see small changes. She came home later, talked more on the phone, and dropped names I did not recognize. Clients, suppliers, networking events. I didn't think anything of it at first. After all, success equals busyness, right? But things were different in the way she engaged with me. Less there, less involved. One night I inquired if all was well. There was a pause, and then she answered hesitantly, "Yeah," yet her eyes were distant, only tired. The next few weeks, the distance got more and more. She was still polite and kind, but it felt more like a roommate than a partnership. We continued eating together, but the conversations were frivolous, all about her plans, who had phoned, which contractor had backed out. One evening in June, I cooked dinner while she went to a gallery opening. I sat in the dark and waited up for her. When she came home around 10 o'clock, I was still there, the plates untouched on the table. "Oh," she said, surprised. "I didn't realize." "You forgot," I said softly. We sat there in silence for a few moments when I found the courage to ask that question that had been at the back of my mind for weeks. "Susan, do you want this still?" She gazed at me, not unkindly, but with fatigue and a touch of mournfulness. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel like I'm somewhere else now. In my mind, in my emotions. I didn't mean for it to happen. I just changed." I nodded, unwilling to believe it, but knowing it. I had known it was coming, but didn't want to believe it. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "You didn't," I assured her, "but it still hurts." The next morning, she packed a small bag and decamped to a friend's home for a few days. She eventually found her own space a few blocks away. We didn't have a falling out, or a screaming match. We just fell apart in silence. I stayed in that apartment for a bit, picking up some survival jobs and directionlessness. I held no animosity for her. I appreciated her honesty, but I knew I couldn't remain in the city that would forever remind me of what we had built and what I had lost. I went back to the farm in the late summer. My parents took me back without a second to steal, curious about where I had been. Dad offered me the farm again, but I couldn't accept it. Not after trying something else. I wasn't the same young man who left, and I knew the farm deserved someone who could make the farm their life commitment. I hung around for a few months, long enough to help make repairs and mend a few fences, and eat some meals together. In time, I moved on, got a new job and a less frantic life. But every now and then I heard a wind chime or smelled a haunch of roasted garlic, and Susan would spring to mind, along with the fence that had caused it all. I stayed on the farm for some 6 months, allowing myself time to recover, to put my house back in order, and to reconnect with a former self I'd lost. Before Susan, before the city, before the life I thought I wanted, I was lost, but never did I blame her. She never lied to me. Never promised me forever. It was real, what we had, but as she grew into someone else, she grew into something too big for me. I suppose, deep down, I always suspected that might be a possibility. I'd helped her build the life she'd imagined, then watched as she lived it without me. The toughest part wasn't that I lost her, it was dealing with the not knowing what's next. I thought about just staying there on the farm. One day when we were fixing the east fence line, my dad said, "You've got good hands, son. This land is still alive. It could be yours." I studied him, his worn face and strong shoulders, and his old boots, the ones he had worn for years. "I know, Dad," I replied, "but I feel like that part of me is gone." He didn't argue, just nodded and handed me the pair of pliers, and we went back to work in silence. Life on the farm was peaceful, and that was exactly what I needed for a little while. But things had started to change in me back in the city. I couldn't quite describe it. It wasn't ambition or regret. It was restlessness. I had already felt what it was like to make something that didn't fit into the zone of expectation. It was over, but it had changed me. By spring, I did this again. When I tell my mother, she cries a little. She had always hoped that I'd stay nearby and maybe marry a local girl and have kids on our land, but she did not try to stop me. She kissed my forehead the way she did when I was a child, saying, "Just don't forget where home is." So I moved to Missouri, to a small town that reminded me of my childhood, but in which I was new enough to be a blank slate. I got a supervisory job at a lumber yard. It was not glamorous, but it kept my hands moving and my mind tethered. I rented a small house on the edge of town, in a quiet neighborhood with an oak tree in the yard. I put up a swing on the porch and started learning how to cook meals that were for one. Some nights, I sat outside with a beer, watching the sun setting, thinking about whether she ever thought of me. For the first year, I expected a letter, a phone call, somebody stepping forth, but nothing ever happened. One day, I looked up her shop online and saw that she had enlarged it, opened a second location in a distant part of Kansas City. She looked happy in the pictures, with longer hair and an aged face and the same smile. I closed that tab and decided that I didn't want to know. Some tales do not need updating. I had a little day-to-day dating here and there, but nothing very serious or fancy. I met friends and grew more accustomed to solitude. Gradually, I came to love it. There's a strange peace in building a life that belongs to you alone, unfree of other people's expectations without its disappointments, just simple, quiet moments. Here I am now, at 65, looking back, and I don't resent what happened. Instead, I feel gratitude. Susan showed me the deeper love under all that. She reminded me that there is more to life than simply being. Life is meant for growth, reaching out to the things that keep your soul alive. I had a part in getting it for her, and in doing so, I found a part of me that I never knew existed. But she also taught me that love does not always last. Other times, it's returning just to teach you a lesson, and then it leaves when the lesson is done. We never talked again, not once. But I've reconciled myself to that. There are days when I sit on my porch and the wind just rustles right, and I hear that old wind chime in my head and I smile. Not because I'm missing it, but because for one brief moment, she and I are exactly in the spot where we're already at. Her standing right behind that fence asking me, "So you got a girl?" That changed the trajectory of my life. Even if it didn't end in forever, it gave me direction, it gave me purpose, and it gave me a reason to find out who I really was. That was nearly 40 years ago, but I still remember the lemonade, the fence, and her enchanting smile. I'm okay now.